Perhaps it is the sign of the times that many of us feel so disconnected from our elected leaders. As new technology seems to be advancing the human race faster than we can keep up, the mainstream media appears to be lagging behind. Today's so-called revelations may really be old news. Questions plague our souls. Why does up now appear down? And why is what was once right condemned by so many? The three hosts of this show certainly do not have all the answers, but they do have questions. Questions that you, your family, and your friends may be asking every day. Welcome to What in the World is Going On? November 22nd, 1963. A nation is shocked by the news that its president has been shot in Dallas, Texas. Within hours of the initial reports comes a slew of newscasts using words and phrases we thought we'd never hear. Here it is, from Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official. President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Time, some 38 minutes ago. That weekend was a nightmare, as one revelation after another found its way into our homes on the radio and through TV. Then suddenly, and without warning, the entire nation watches the only suspect in the assassination get gunned down right in front of our eyes. What just happened? Was there a coup to overthrow our government? Has the whole world gone mad? Little did we know that this story would never go away. There were too many questions, even from a nation that at that point in time believed most everything it heard from their government. Things didn't add up. And there was a sense for many that November 22nd, 1963 would forever mark the end of a nation's innocence. Hi, I'm Ed Callaway. On this show, we'll have part 2 of our series with Robert Morningstar, Who Killed Kennedy. Robert has been researching the JFK assassination for 50 years. He is a graduate of Fordham University. He is a civilian intelligence analyst and a psychotherapist living in New York City. Part 2 of our interview begins where we left off, when Robert said the man in the JFK autopsy photo was not President Kennedy. And now, here's part 2 of that interview.
It is another man, a convenient dupe, another patsy, a corrupt one, unfortunately, because he was involved with the mob. But I'll explain that in a few minutes.
I can't wait to hear this.
Let me finish the shoot. So, at the grassy knoll behind the picket fence was a man dressed in a policeman's uniform who fired a rifle. But to the immediate right of Zapruder, on the abutment, alongside the abutment on which Zapruder was standing, was another shooter, crouched low on that concrete porch, right in front of the pergola tower. Behind him was parked a green Rambler station wagon. When President Kennedy came down the street, the first shot hit him between the shoulder blades just before he got behind the sign, or at the sign. Now, at this moment, something remarkable happened that has been edited and cut out from the Zapruder film and every other film that exists of it. When President Kennedy was hit in the back, the reflex, the action was the bullet hit him in the back between the shoulder blades, but went down into him. It didn't go forward into his chest because of the angle, the slope. It went downward toward his stomach. And what President Kennedy did was he instantly grabbed his solar plexus, his stomach, with 2 hands, and he stood up in the car. And he yelled, "Oh my God, I've been hit!" Then he fell back into the seat. How do I know this? Because if you read Mr. Zapruder's testimony before the Warren Commission, he says that the car went behind the sign, and then he saw the president pop up behind the sign, and then he saw the president disappear, and then he saw the car come out. Specter, or one of the other interrogators, because they weren't interviewers, they were interrogators, slanting and biasing, trying to lead the witnesses. He said, that's not possible. President Kennedy was behind the sign. The sign was blocking the view of the limousine and the president. And Zapruder said, no, I saw his head pop up behind the sign. Okay? So now, let me tell you about Mr. William Newman, who was standing down the street with his wife and his child. He's seen in some of the films holding his baby, his boy, and standing next to his wife at the very moment when President Kennedy's head splits open from the two shots that came from the right front and the straight front from the grassy knoll. This man was the closest person to President Kennedy other than the people who were in the car. So this was right in front of Mr. Newman. And on the, the 35th anniversary of the assassination, November 22nd, 1998, I was in Dallas, and there was Mr. Newman, and boy, did I have something to tell him. I saw him humiliated and disgraced and embarrassed by Vincent Bugliosi, the DA, Los Angeles DA, in the mock trial of Lee Harvey Oswald. Jerry Spence and Vincent Bugliosi went at it in the early 1980s with a staged trial for Lee Harvey Oswald, and they got all the real witnesses, or as many as they could, to come in and testify. Now, Mr. William Newman, whom I saw on that night on CBS along with his wife tell the story, was one of the witnesses. First, I'll tell you the story. Mr. William Newman appeared on CBS News along with his wife on November 22nd, 1963, at approximately 8 o'clock in the evening, and again later on that night, and re-shown several times over the weekend. And they said, what happened in Dealey Plaza? What did you see when the president was shot? He said, the car was coming down the street, and then I heard the crack, and I saw the president stand up, and I thought he was going along with a gag or something. Those are his clearest words. I saw the president stand up in the car, and I thought he was going along with a gag or something. And then he fell back into the car. And then I saw him reach for his throat. Then the car came down, and this is where he's right in front of him. And he said, then I heard the shot, and it took off the top of his head and shot his ear right off. That was an incredible thing to say. They shot the top of his head, and it took his right ear. It took his ear right off. Now, I've looked at the Zapruder film. I've analyzed it for 30, 40 years. Always bothered me until 1992 when I was able to get a frame-by-frame copy of it and an original from Zapruder's son. And I realized this thing is so heavily doctored. It's cut, spliced, diced, rejoined. It's even colored in with black marker, and in one frame, a false leg has been drawn on the little girl, Rosemary Willis, to make her appear as if she never stopped running. However, let me go back to Zapruder seeing the president stand up in the car behind the sign. He saw his red hair popped up. He saw him fall back behind the sign. Mr. Newman said he saw the president stand up in the car as if he was going along with a gag or something, and Mrs. Newman attested to the same thing. So why don't we see that? Well, because it was cut out. The Warren Commission testimony, especially the testimony of Senator Ralph Yarborough, who gives the clearest space-time sequence of what happened, said the cavalcade, as he called it, the presidential retinue, the cavalcade came around Elm Street, and then the car made a stop, and then it went again. We heard the shots, stopped again, and then it really got going. Said, I saw a soldier up on the grassy knoll. I assume he was a soldier because the way he hit the ground looked like a man who had been in combat. Right? So he had looked at the grassy knoll. He saw the shot from the grassy knoll. He saw the reaction of the man, the soldier, quote-unquote. Well, the soldier, quote-unquote, was Gordon Arnold, whom you'll see in The Men Who Killed Kennedy tell how he was standing there, and a policeman and a guy with a railroad hat were over there by the porch, and he happened to be taking a movie of the assassination. And the cop came around after the assassination and said, did you take a movie of that? Give me that film. And he beat him kicked him, beat him to the ground, took the camera, ripped out the cartridge. It was a Keystone camera. Zapruder had a Bell and Howell. And how do I know so much about the Zapruder film? Because in 1963, December 1963, my father said to me, "What do you want for Christmas, Robert?" I said, "Dad, I would love to have this camera." And it was the Bell and Howell Optronic Eye through the lens reflex camera that Zapruder had, so I know the camera. And I'm going to tell you something else Zapruder said. Zapruder said that he shot the Zapruder film in slow motion. This was one of the neatest things about that camera. I wish you could see it. Do Bell and Howell Optronic Eye movie camera, 1963, you'll see it. But the coolest thing on this one was I got the pistol grip. And the pistol grip had a clamp that hooked onto the side trigger. And you squeezed it, and you got a regular 18 frame per second movie. But if you squeezed it really hard, this thing kicked up into high gear and shot, some people say 48 frames per second. I remember 24 frames per second. Regardless, the film would come out in slow motion, 1/3 speed, slow motion. So the Zapruder film is not in slow motion. So that's how radically doctored this film is. And I've studied how it's been done. And there are so many versions, because as the years went by, they kept trying to polish it and refresh it. But it's still, to the expert eye, dare I call myself that, after all these 50 years, you can start to see it. So what I hope to do right now is to do a little mind scrub. Pardon me for the expression. I want to do a mind scrub on the audience and alert them to disregard the Zapruder film as an optical illusion that's been imposed on you through mind control. And the mind control is this operation that originated with the director of MK Ultra, Cord Meyer, whom I've mentioned before, who is the principal in the CIA who directed this operation, delegated it downward to a hired killer named David Morales, who was enlisted in 1968 to conduct the Robert F. Kennedy assassination. David Morales was in Dealey Plaza. David Morales was in the ballroom in the hotel in Los Angeles the night potential President Robert Kennedy was assassinated. A man named Sean O'Sullivan did a movie called RFK Must Die, and he compiled the greatest collection of video and film of the RFK assassination, and he found two people. He found one person, David Morales. He found another CIA agent in the film. I believe his name is George Joannides. However, I found somebody in the film that was also in Dealey Plaza, and that was James Brayton, a known member of the Mafia, who was caught in the Daltex building and released in the afternoon or the evening of November 22nd. So the connections are incredible. But this is the information that E. Howard Hunt gave to St. John Hunt on his deathbed. You know, E. Howard Hunt was such a dedicated CIA man that he named his son St. John. Do you know why?
I do not know why, no.
Okay. The motto of the Central Intelligence Agency comes from the Gospel according to St. John. And that Gospel says, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free."
Right.
And this is what I hope to do right now by alerting everyone who's listening to us now that the next time you see the Zapruder film, regard it with skepticism. Study it. Watch the incredible inconsistencies, the cuts, the jumps, in some cases, an obvious splice. It's been really well doctored now where they're more subtle, but they can't eliminate the scars on the Zapruder film. Because, as I say, the truth is seamless. It has no breaks. It has no inconsistencies. It has no contradictions. Every part of the truth is self-supporting. The truth is a self-supporting structure. It stands on its own. And the greatest lie that's been foisted on the American people is that the Zapruder film depicts what happened in Dealey Plaza.
Robert, where is the original Zapruder film?
The original Zapruder film is most likely in a very secret vault in the Central Intelligence Agency. And I have heard, and this is ironic, I have heard that a good copy of it exists at the John F. Kennedy Center for Warfare, where they show it to special forces on how to conduct a perfect assassination. Now, let me tell you about the perfect assassination. This assassination of President Kennedy was modeled on a very famous assassination in World War II of Hangman Heydrich in Lidice, Czechoslovakia. See, the Czechs in World War II, they were considered Germanic, Teutonic. And when Czechoslovakia was taken over, the Nazis took a different attitude toward Czechs and kind of tried to seduce them into coming along with the master race theory. And they put Reinhard Heydrich, who I would describe as Hitler's adopted son, and the man who was designated to become the next Führer after Hitler, by Hitler. He said, this is the ultimate Aryan. You know, this is our boy, the blonde beast. And at first he tried to reconcile with the Czechs and get them to come on board the Nazi program, but the Czechs resisted, and they had a very strong resistance, and they were, you know, doing sabotage and assassinating soldiers or killing soldiers and engaging in partisan warfare. And so he turned and he brought in the Iron Fist. So, actually he did not bring in the Iron Fist right away. He was seducing the Czechs, and the Czechs were falling for it. And British intelligence said, "Holy mackerel! Look at these guys. They're so persuasive, and the Czechs are falling for it. We can't let this happen. We got to get these guys out of this mindset." Okay, what do we do? Is that what we'll have to do is kill Reinhard Heydrich. We know that Heydrich goes every morning. He takes the same route from his villa into the town of Lidice. He comes down this street. He makes this turn, and when that turn is made, the car has to slow down. That's when we're going to get him. That's when we get him. We've got him in the car. We've got him in the vehicle. And when he makes the turn, the car has to slow down. We're going to rehearse this, and we're going to make it happen. So British intelligence hires King Vidor, a very famous Hollywood producer, to come on board this mission. He was actually an English producer. He did, I believe he did produce the Thief of Baghdad. So they asked him to do this, and what they did is they took Czech resistance fighters and flew them to Hollywood, where King Vidor built, and the studios built, a set that was exactly like that corner in Lidice, Czechoslovakia, where Reinhard Heydrich would make that turn every morning. So they got these guys and they choreographed them, rehearsed them, throw in the hand grenades, shoot the machine gun, finish them off with pistols, get the guy. So they dress rehearsal. They got it down. They parachuted these resistance fighters into Czechoslovakia, and they waited and lay in wait. And when Reinhard Heydrich came around the corner, they got him.
So the Kennedy administration, the Kennedy assassination was based on this. It's
modeled exactly on this. That's why that turn at Dealey Plaza is so important.
Okay.
Because if they had continued down Main Street, straight down, they could have gone to the Stemmons Freeway that way. But it was rigged to ensure that he would come into the kill zone. There is a book by that name by Craig Roberts, which I recommend to everyone. Craig Roberts wrote a book called The Kill Zone. The most important part of that book, to me, besides the mechanics of the assassination, really, is he shows the involvement of Lyndon Johnson in big land deals in Vietnam. Johnson had been sent to Vietnam in 1963, and while there, he took opportunities to invest in Vietnam.
Oh, my goodness.
He bought vast tracts of land under Lady Bird Johnson's name and corporation.
I had no idea. Robert, let's take them.
And he leased them. He leased them back to the Army and the Air Force for air bases and Army bases.
Let me take an ID break here. You're listening to What in the World is Going On. All right, Robert. Let's do this now. We've associated Johnson with this, and take us now as we have this assassination occur, and then I want you to get into Officer Tippit, because that's
perfect.
a fascinating thing that happens there. So Kennedy is shot. Now we've got basically pandemonium in Dallas, and you take it from there.
All right. Kennedy is shot. The streets are all blocked up. Lee Harvey Oswald makes an exit. He had been in the lunchroom when the policeman came in 90 seconds after the assassination. But the Alkins photo shows Lee Harvey Oswald standing in the doorway of the Texas School Book Depository looking out at the assassination as it's happening. And the proof is in the shirt that he's wearing. A lot of people have tried to make the case that it's a guy named Billy Lovelady. Look, the shirt that the man in the doorway is wearing is missing a top button, which makes the shirt say open at the top with a long V. When you look at Lee Harvey Oswald's arrest pictures, that shirt is missing the button. So let's not talk about Billy Lovelady anymore. So Oswald gets away. He tries to take a cab. Everything. He takes a bus. The bus gets stuck. He jumps out, walks, gets a cab, gets home. A few minutes after 1 o'clock, we are told Officer J.D. Tippit is assassinated. I say assassinated because he's a big part of the whole plan. He's part of the plot. The media says Oswald murdered a police officer trying to get away. Right? Oswald was in the theater watching War is Hell. He had already bought the ticket, and he had already gone into the theater when Tippit was shot. Tippit stopped someone. The man came up to Tippett's window on the passenger side, laid his forearms on the window, on the car door, talked to him. Tippit, for some reason, got out of the car, driver's side, walked out. As he was crossing the hood, the man jumped out, pulled out a gun, fired, hit Tippit in the chest, hit Tippit in a brass button that was driven into his body and gouged the body. It must have been like a perfect shot. Imagine hitting a brass button dead on. Boom. The button is pushed, but it doesn't penetrate, and it scars his midsection. He takes another shot, 2 shots, one in the chest and one in the ribs, and he falls. But instead of running away, the assassin walks over to the fallen police officer, crouches down, puts the gun to his temple at a certain angle and fires a single shot and finishes him off. He stands up, runs away, emptying cartridges, and he says, "Poor dumb cop," overheard by one of the two ladies that saw him getting away. They heard him say, "Poor dumb cop." So poor dumb cop. Why? Because this poor dumb cop was part of the plot and didn't know that he was the getaway vehicle. That's what I call Tippit and Tippett's body, the getaway vehicle. They had to prove that a single gunman had killed President Kennedy with a single shot through the head. So what did they do? They got a police officer who, for all intents and purposes, from the brow down to the jaw, could be said to have been a fraternal twin of President Kennedy. The difference in the two men was that Tippit had a receding, balding hairline. He had black hair, but in all other aspects, as far as size and weight, he was almost identical to President Kennedy.
And wasn't he referred to by the people in the police department that way as well?
Yes, sir. Listen to this. When I first discovered the headshot in Tippit followed a trajectory from the temporal bone, the right side temporal bone, and hit the back of the top of his head, I realized this is impossible. How could Oswald shoot a guy with a rifle from the Texas School Book Depository, put the bullet in the top of the back of his head and blow out the right temporal region, and then 45 minutes later put a gun to a guy and put it in the temporal region, and it hits the top of the head. I said, now this is it. I've got something here. They obviously used Tippit's brain for it, for the autopsy. So I became very expert in the brain and its pieces. I already had a background because I did pre-med in college as part of my psychology degree. So I really felt I had it. But as time goes by, in the days that when this was happening in 1992, I said, well, what did they tell us? Oh, yes, the New York Times said that Tippit had been shot in the eye and so horribly disfigured that his coffin was sealed and not even his family was allowed to see the body. So I said, well, now we've got two bodies and we have two brains that have been shot by one bullet through the top of the head. Now let me get into the work. So I went to Chicago. I was invited to a lecture to address a closed session of researchers where I presented my work on the doctoring of the Zapruder film for the first time. And afterwards, there was a Q&A, and I was in the audience, and the thought came to me, hey, listen, I've discovered this thing about Tippit and Tippit's brain. So I raised my hand and I said, listen, I've been studying this a long time, and I have never seen another picture of Tippit other than the one that was released when he was killed, which showed a man of about 26 years old looking kind of like a surly Elvis Presley picture. That's why I called it the Tippit Elvis picture. And how come we've never seen another photograph of Officer Tippit? Does anyone here? These are 200 researchers, the top ones in the world, really, in Chicago in 1992. So I said, does anybody have another picture of Tippit? Not a word. And I said, I'll tell you why. I've discovered this as such and such. The brain was shot. I think that somebody took Tippit's brain and substituted it in the Warren Commission autopsy. How people started to laugh. Ha, 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 ha. That's a good one. Except that the gentleman at the podium, the master of ceremonies, was Professor George Michael Avica, University of Hartford. And he said, hold on a second here. Oh, not so fast. Said, I've been down to Dallas, and I've investigated Tippit, and I found out that Tippit bore such a close resemblance to President Kennedy that his friends on the Dallas Police Department used to rib him and call him Jack and JFK. Everyone went silent. They just shut up. And there was some food for thought. I left that conference, and a gentleman named Dan DuPont from North Hollywood, California, came up to me and said, Mr. Morningstar, I have to speak to you. I said, yes. He says, I heard what you said about Tippit. And I said, yeah, isn't that curious? Isn't that interesting? He said, yeah, but I want to tell you, I have Tippit's autopsy. I said, what? He says, yes, I have Tippit's autopsy. I said, how did you get that? He said, in 1964 and 65, a Canadian reporter named Gary Muir, M-U-R-R, went to Dallas and he investigated Tippit, and he got Tippit's autopsy report and included it in his monograph on the Tippit murder. And I have it. And he said, I'm going to send it to you. I think that this is going to help you. So I receive it a couple of days, about a week later, and I open it up, and I start reading it, and I go, oh, my God. I have never been so right in my life. I take the Tippit autopsy report, and I put it alongside the Warren Commission autopsy report on President Kennedy's body. And I start going through the two reports, and I said, my God, this is a paraphrase. What I'm reading in the John F. Kennedy autopsy is a paraphrase of what I'm reading of the wounds suffered by Tippit and different organs in his body. They just use slightly different words for it. The descriptions of the areas of the brain that were damaged by the traverse of the missile. The autopsy report by Dr. Earl Rose was done on Tippit at 3:15 in the afternoon on November 22nd. 3:15 in the afternoon, November 22nd, 1963, Dr. Earl Rose finishes and signs and authenticates the Tippit autopsy. But At 1:30 in the afternoon, Dr. Earl Rose was wrestling with the Secret Service and fighting with them, tugging on the coffin as they tried to extract the body from Parkland Hospital illegally. What the Secret Service did that day was totally illegal. And that's why we don't really have all the information. So Earl Rose was fighting with the Secret Service over custody of the body and the authority of the Dallas coroner to study this murder. That's all it was to him. And I don't care he was president. It's just another murder to me. You know, the body has to stay in Texas. So Secret Service pulled out their guns, muscled their way out, hijacked an ambulance, took the body of President Kennedy from Trauma Room 1 to Love Field. Meantime, as this is happening, right, at 1:30 in the afternoon, Tippit gets shot. In 5 minutes, an ambulance shows up to pick up his body. Folks, there were no cell phones in 1963. There was a man named Callaway who went to the car, grabbed the mic minutes after Tippit was killed. A citizen grabbed the mic and called Dallas police and told them, one of your officers had been shot. And he took a gun and he followed the killer in the direction that two guys, Warren Reynolds, and he followed this man that ultimately disappeared into the basement of a fundamentalist church that was surrounded by the Dallas Police Department with the guy that they had seen kill Tippit in there. And when Oswald was arrested at the theater and it was announced, all of them just left. Nobody was interested anymore in the men who had fled into the fundamentalist church. So now Tippit is picked up in 5 minutes after his assassination and scurried away. And for an hour, they lost track of the body. The Dallas police didn't know where Tippit's body was. Tippit's body was taken immediately to Methodist Hospital in Dallas, where he was pronounced DOA. And then Judge Brown, Joe Brown, ordered an autopsy. The body was taken from Methodist Hospital to Parkland Hospital, and can you imagine what a rapid autopsy that must have been to have been completed? Now, Tippit is killed according to Warren Commission, around 1:15 in the afternoon, generally speaking. Nobody really knows the time exactly because they fudged the timeline. Anyway, the body is there. 1:30, Methodist Hospital, disappears for an hour. 2:30, I would suppose. Give it an hour, go over there, DOA, Joe Brown signs, the judge signs the order for the autopsy. Body goes to Parkland Hospital, and there it's autopsied, and at 3:15 in the afternoon, I would give it a 45 minutes to do a complete autopsy in which the skull is open, the brain is removed, the bullets are removed from Tippit's body through a very interesting process. They take an x-ray of his body and they see the bullets lodged in the thoracic vertebra. So he goes in through the back and pulls out the bullet from the thoracic vertebra. Where did I say President Kennedy said he was shot? Between the shoulder blades at an angle of descent of 40 to 60 degrees. That's kind of fuzzy, isn't it? Should be more precise for a bullet trajectory.
Oh, my gosh. I mean, if you're thinking about what you're saying, and believe me, I've heard you talk about some of this before, but it is so astonishing.
It's astonishing, it's gruesome, it's an American Gothic horror story.
Yes.
And so what was done is both bodies were taken to Washington. The body of Tippit was autopsied and dispatched. Now, how did the body get to Washington? As I said, the Secret Service had hijacked the ambulance from O'Neill, and O'Neill's ambulance was at Love Field. O'Neill then said, we have to get that ambulance back. So Aubrey Reich, his assistant to the mortician, got in a car with him and a Lieutenant Butcher from the Dallas Police Department, and he drove out to Love Field to get the other car. And Aubrey Reich, his assistant, was to be the driver. And they got to Love Field, and they drove up to the airplanes, Air Force One, And there was another let's call it Air Force Two. There was another airplane that had been Lyndon Johnson's plane. And Lyndon Johnson, as we all know, stalled for leaving Dallas. Everybody wanted him to split, and he said, no, I can't leave Dallas until I'm inaugurated. Find Sarah Hughes. She'll inaugurate me. And he would not leave Dallas. And he claimed that Robert Kennedy told him, we have to be inaugurated. We can't be without a president. And there's no rule. There's nothing in the Constitution that says that the inauguration has to be immediate. So anyway, that was his stall. Then he stalled because Mrs. Johnson's luggage had to be moved from the other airplane into the hold of Air Force One. It is at that time that I believe that Tippit's body in a body bag was dumped into the hold, leading to the observation of some of the Warren Commission investigators. Oh no, the Church Committee investigators in 1977, they were the ones who noticed very bad bruising on the body, and they noted in the photographs, we noticed that there's some severe bruises on this body, and no one could explain where the bruising came from. So the body is stashed in the hold. Johnson comes in to land at Love Field. He calls, and I have heard this myself. I have the Air Force One tapes. I'm sure you can find them now on the internet, and probably good quality copies of the transmissions from Trinity Control to Air Force One and what Johnson wanted. Johnson ordered U.S. Air Force military police to surround the airplane. He ordered 2 helicopters. And while the body, the purported body of President Kennedy was being dispatched or transferred from the airplane into the Navy ambulance, on the other side of the plane, 2 helicopters had landed. And it is at this time that the bodies were taken to Walter Reed Medical Center, and then from there went to Bethesda. Dennis David, Commander Dennis David, U.S. Navy, was at Bethesda Naval Hospital to receive the body. He went into the back bay where he was told President Kennedy's body was going to be delivered. He went there with several Navy corpsmen. They received the body in a plain metal casket, a cheap metal casket. They took it upstairs to the 5th floor of Bethesda Naval Hospital and waited half an hour. The Secret Service men who had been with President Kennedy, not the Secret Service, the FBI men who had been in the trauma room and saw the autopsy, not the autopsy, but the emergency procedures and the wounds originally, were present when this body was taken out of the casket and a sheet was removed from the head. And they said it was noted that surgery had been done up to the top of the head. So somehow these FBI men, Siebert and O'Neill, who saw the wound in the trauma room in Dallas at 1 to 1:30 in the afternoon when the body was removed, saw it that evening around 8 o'clock in Bethesda Naval Hospital, and they said it was obvious that surgery had been applied specifically to the top of the head.
Between the time it left Dallas and got there.
Exactly. And in Dallas, nobody did any surgery to the top of the head because the president was dead. But the procedures had been to open up do a tracheotomy, open up the windpipe and slide a tube in, and they also opened up his chest and pushed a tube into, and that's what was done. It was obvious they couldn't save the man. The brain was liquefied and was pouring out through the back of the head, which leads me back to Mr. Newman in 1998 when I said to you, Bugliosi got Mr. Newman on the stand to tell the story I told you again, word for word. As I saw it in 1963, the day it happened, he told the story word for word the same way in the trial of the Harvey Oswald. Saw the president stand up. I thought he was going along with a gag or something. Bugliosi comes over and says, oh, well, let me show you the Zapruder film. He shows him the Zapruder film. The car comes around the corner. Not really. The car does not come around the corner. It's an optical illusion. Look closely, or tape it, or DVD the Zapruder film, then play it slowly. 3 motorcycle cops come around the corner. Your eye follows 3 motorcycle cops going down the corner till about frame 100. At frame 99, if you stop it, you'll see a little red plaid skirt disappearing behind the concrete porch where the fountain is in Dealey Plaza. She's disappearing. This is Rosemary Willis. Your eye is watching 3 motorcycles come around the corner. Instantly, the film is cut. You see a motorcycle. You mistake that motorcycle for the first 3 that you saw. It's not the same motorcycle.
Wow, what an amazing interview with Robert Morningstar. And the thing about Officer Tippit is quite an eye-opener. But here's the best news. Part 3 reveals even more, and will be released in the next couple of weeks, all before the anniversary on November 22nd of the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Until then, I'm Ed Galloway saying, see you next time on What in the World is Going On. UFOs, alternative history, ancient archaeology, aliens, missing people, the power of the pyramids, conspiracies. What in the world is going on?